Chapter 6.5 Our Own Prisons. Retta's surroundings disappeared, replaced by an infinite black void, and in front of her was a door. Karada was gone. Her hand was replaced by the knob and a plaque read, Karada. The door was the only thing in sight. Am I in her mind? Hello? Retta called out, hoping Karada would respond. Nothing came. Retta's voice disappeared into the dark. All there was the door. The baton glowed bright on her arm. You really can't just talk and tell me what's going on? The baton didn't respond. All right. If the only option is the door, then the door it is. Retta turned the knob. The tumbler clicked, and she pushed through, entering Karada's door. Her feet never touched ground. Retta floated like a ghost and stood on air. It felt both natural and surreal, like it would in a dream. Somehow, she knew how to move, knew how to float, knew how to interact with the dreamscape. And then she looked down. Oh! Hundreds of feet below was a black and white replica of Io. From her bird's-eye vantage point, Retta saw the Ironhide on one side and the glass palace on the other. The Ironhide still had color. Their chests radiated warmth from their fiery hearts, but that changed when they approached the glass palace. The color drained from their skin. The warmth faded from their soul. Their skin turned to glass, and as Ironhide walked across the main drag towards the glass palace, their humanity sapped away. Their gaits became rigid. They synced together in monochromatic lockstep. The rain beaded on their backs. Their skins turned to glass, and their soulless husks were drawn towards the palace. The city stole their souls. Their color, their essence, their spirits were sucked from their bodies. Towering over the glass palace was the thief. Karada. A bot version of Karada, taller than her own billboard. Her siren song beckoned the Ironhide closer. She was the parasite that sapped them of their souls. She took on their color and auras, taking their humanity for her own. What's going on here? Retta flew to the colossal Karada bot. Its eyes were empty and hollow. Its flesh was metal and cold. Retta approached, touched its cheek, and her hand phased through. She was like an apparition. Inside Karada's mind, Red was unfazed by reality's constraints. She entered the bot, and behind its lifeless eyes was Stella. She manned the controls, while Juniper was behind, locked in a cage. Unlike everyone else in the dreamscape, Juniper was the first to notice Retta. The moment Retta phased through the wall, Juniper's eyes were locked on her. Juniper rattled the bars to get her attention. Shh, Retta whispered, worried that Stella would notice, but she didn't. She was focused on controlling the Karada bot. Retta passed through Stella like a ghost and went to Juniper. Please, Juniper desperately whispered to Retta. Please, help me. It's okay, Retta whispered back. I got you. Retta pulled out her laser knife, ignited its edge, and as it sizzled with heat, her baton did the same. It glowed and resonated with the knife. The blade felt different in her hand. Retta twisted it with a newfound weight. It pulled and dragged through the air, like it was bending the dream around it. Retta tried something she knew shouldn't work. She brought the knife to the cage, pressed its edge against the metal, and felt it give. Her knife couldn't normally cut through metal. Not like this. But in this dream, it sliced the cage's lock clean. A single stroke, and it fell to the ground, split in two. The baton, through the knife, changed the reality of the dream. Juniper's cage opened. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Of course, Retta said and offered her hand to help. Juniper clasped Retta's hand, and suddenly the baton went into overdrive. Its glow expanded. It radiated through Red's skin, down her hand, and into Juniper's arm. It fused between them, shining along Juniper's shoulder, upper neck, and illuminated the skin of her face. Juniper radiated, her entire body shined, and she became a supernova, blinding Retta with her light. In a flash, Retta was back to reality. And in reality, Juniper looked surprised, unsure exactly what happened, why it happened, or how it happened. But she felt it. Retta knew she felt it. Juniper was shocked by her out-of-body experience. Rather than add to Juniper's confusion, Retta concluded her interview and said, "Thanks again, Juniper. Hopefully we can talk again?" She regained her composure. "Yes, absolutely." And, completely off the record, Retta said, seizing the moment she had, "I heard you did an interview with Celeste Starlight. Maybe we can talk about that too?" "Yes, we could do that," Juniper said, exuding a newfound comfort towards Red. "Great. Well, here's my info," Retta said and tapped her link to Juniper's. "I'll be in touch." "Sure." "Thanks again." Retta left and again felt a comforting, inviting warmth. It radiated from her heart down to her arm. When she looked, she saw the ink of the tattoo bleed, spilling out and forming a musical note on her arm. It made Retta smile. So, we have a connection. And then she heard Karada's thoughts. Why do I feel like I can trust her? Karada thought. Because you can, Retta responded in her thoughts. She didn't think anything of it until she noticed her voice sounded different. It sounded like Juniper. Who are you? Karada thought back. They were still connected. Karada heard Retta's thoughts the same way Luca did, but now she understood it better. Retta had an idea. She wasn't sure if her idea was ethical. In fact, it definitely wasn't. But she knew the feeling Karada wrestled with. She knew how imprisoned Karada felt with Stella, the same way she felt with Tobias. Red wanted to help her, even if it meant doing something unorthodox. She answered Karada's question. I'm you, Retta said, her voice the sound of Juniper from their connection in her dream. I'm Juniper. Tobias was soaked to his core by the time he got to 36 Blank Bar. Unlike the glass buildings, it was made from wood, unique and on its own away from downtown Io. Perched atop its thick, wooden front door was a small, gas-powered lantern with curved metal casing. It beckoned strangers in with a humble, subtle light, different from the bright glow of the lava flow pipes. Tobias gripped the door's metal handle. It was tarnished from the rain, but still felt the same way it did years ago. He pressed his thumb down on the latch, pushed the door open, and noticed things looked older. The moss in the wood grain grooves grew thicker, but Tobias reckoned that's what years would do. The same doorbell jingled as he entered. Dim, flickering candles lined the dark wood bar. It was empty, but empty didn't mean much when it only fit 4 stools. A large bay window cast shadows of raindrops against the bar, and each shadow streaked down as the drops ran along the glass. Even empty, the bartender waited. He grayed at the edges, his black hair turned to silver, and his hairline was higher than Tobias remembered. He polished a glass with his rag, until he heard Tobias's chime at the door. He looked up, surprised, and was even more surprised by who stood before him. Hey, Bosco, Tobias said, and waited at the entrance, shutting the door behind him. It can't be, the bartender whispered, placed his glass on the bar, and set his rag by his side. Tobias O'Donnell. Been a bit. Tobias sauntered to the bar, reached for a stool, but Bosco came around to greet him. It's so good to see you, Bosco said and wrapped his arms around Tobias. He squeezed him tight and slapped Tobias's back. I thought you were in prison. I was. There's a lot I could catch you up on, Bosco. Well, please, take a seat. Bosco pulled out a stool for Tobias and returned behind the bar. Still take the same drink? Tobias smiled. Let's see if you remember. He reached into his pocket and searched for physical credits, but only scrounged up a mint, and 2 meager credits. Bosco noticed out of the corner of his eye. Please, no need. You're my guest, Toby. It's been too long. It has. You know who still comes here? Who? The doorbell chimed on cue. Bosco looked at the door, smiled, and Tobias turned around. A woman entered, shut her umbrella, and turned to face them. He knew her long, silk black hair. He knew her gold top and her purple jacket. He especially knew the fang necklace that shimmered in the light, resting over her heart. Oh, she said, as simple as that, when she noticed Tobias. Stella's back too, Bosco said, looking between them. It's been a long time since we've all been here together. Yeah, Tobias said, and Bosco felt the tension rise. Long time. Bosco poured a drink for Stella and placed it next to Tobias. I'll let you two catch up, he said, and went to the back of the bar to give them privacy. What are you doing here? Stella asked before stepping any closer. I'm supposed to bring you in. Oh. Yeah. Tobias took a sip from his drink, averted his eyes, and avoided looking at Stella. So, Stella said, this is like Callisto, then. Tobias didn't answer. He took a long moment, rolled the ice around in his drink, and took another swig. Why ain't you running? I know if you want to find me, running won't help. Stella stepped forward and sat beside Tobias, taking the drink Bosco left for her. She lifted it to her lips, tilted her head back, and took a long drink. With her neck craned back, Tobias noticed her fang necklace glisten in the light, just like his did. You still got it? Of course, she said and set her glass down. Why wouldn't I? I mean, after everything. After everything, you still gave me everything I know, Toby. I can hate you, but I can't forget that. She didn't look at him. She rolled her drink in her hands and let the candle's flame dance along the glass's rim. The rain outside filled the bouts of silence between them. Stella avoided looking at Toby, opting for the ground instead, and looked at her umbrella, where the raindrops collected like dew along its edges. So, you're gonna take me in, she said, reminiscing as she looked at the wet umbrella on the ground. Yeah. Do you remember when you found me? The first time? Stella said, remembering the bitter, damp cold of that night. Of course, Tobias said. I still hear you singing, echoing down that alley. You should have been a pro. Yeah, I should have, she said. The rain filled the silence between them, once again. Imagine if I did go pro, she said, swirling the drink in her glass while daydreaming. Just imagine. Well, you'd probably use those bats I hate, Tobias said, smiling. Yeah, I would. She smiled a little. I gotta admit, you were good with them. They help. They keep people's attention, you know? Nah, your voice is fine for that. No, it's not, she said with a bite of anger, and then retreated back to the comfort of her drink. It's not that easy to be heard. Tobias sat in silence, reminiscing on days gone by. Then he said, Is that why you're working with Luca? How'd you hear? Info I stole from Jimbo. Ugh, that creep. She took the bottle Bosco left for them and poured herself another glass. Of course he stalked us. I made sure he ain't anymore, Tobias said with a smirk. Stella knew what that meant and smiled in turn, offering the bottle to Tobias. He slid his glass along the table and let her fill him up. Yeah, Stella said. Yeah, I'm working with Luca again. You know he's got to have a bigger plan. Of course I know, but at least his aren't as wild as Vic's were, she said, topping them both off. All I know is, if I showcase the bots, Then he gets me a stage in the outer reach. You think a stage? In public? In the outer reach of all places? Is good for Vicious Six like us? Tobias said. The stage isn't for me. She paused. Tobias looked at her sideways, and Stella looked back to the rain-soaked umbrella, sitting at her side. I found a girl, Toby. She looked back at him, the same way you found me. Tobias averted his eyes from hers. She's good, and she's Ironhide too, and... She paused, tempering her rising excitement, and choked up. People listen to her, Toby. Her voice quivered as she said it. They actually listen to her. He kept his silence, continuing to listen. Stella steeled herself. She's performing tomorrow. Can you... She paused, but for this, was willing to beg. Can you please give me one more day? I need this. She waited for Tobias to say something. Anything. He didn't. And she said, for her. He brought his drink to his lips, tilting it near vertical and downing the rest in one gulp. He brought the glass to the bar and stood up to leave. One day, Tobias said, and don't run. Thank you, Toby, she said. Tobias turned to the door, but before he left, Stella said, Toby? He turned around. Why are you doing this to us? She tempered a rising anger. Again. He looked away, took a deep breath in, and sighed. Parole. And they're supposed to get me info. What info? He didn't want to admit it, but he did. On Vera and Lil Kiba. Oh, Stella said somberly. You still think Kiba is... There ain't no death certificate until I see one. My little girl's alive. And Vera? Maybe the missing missus knows more. I'm sorry, Toby, she said. Tobias solemnly nodded, turned his back to her, and went to leave. Right then. You got one day, he said, opened the door, and looked back at her. And still, I'm sorry too.